Let me hit you with something real right away. You don't truly understand silence until it's screaming at you. I was standing in the middle of my living room, barefoot on the hardwood floors my husband and I picked out decades ago, and the quiet felt violent. Heavy like it'd weight, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. No television murmuring in the background, no phone lighting up with notifications, no footsteps echoing down the hallway. Just me and memories. Every wall in that house held a lifetime. I could still see birthday balloons taped up crookedly, ripped down in a rush at the end of the night. Christmas mornings where wrapping paper covered the floor so completely you couldn't see the carpet. Kids sprinting through the hallway like it was a racetrack, laughing, yelling, slamming doors despite being told 100 times to stop running. That house had been loud for decades. It had been alive. And now, nothing. The silence wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calm, it was accusatory, like it was asking a question I didn't want to answer. That's when it hit me. Not one of my children had called me in 3 months, 3 whole months. I stood there replaying the calendar in my head, hoping I was wrong, hoping I'd missed something. But I hadn't, not on my birthday, not on Thanksgiving, not even a lazy, half-hearted, "Hey mom, hope you're good" text. Nothing, no calls. No messages, no check-ins. My hands actually started shaking when the realization settled in, the kind of shaking that comes from shock, not cold, like my body understood the truth before my heart was ready to accept it. Because here's the thing, I already knew why. Deep down, I knew exactly why the silence showed up uninvited and decided to stay. I stopped paying their bills. That was it. That single decision turned my phone into a brick. No emergencies. No sudden crises. No just this once requests, just silence. My name is Barbara. I'm 68 years old and I'm telling you this story from a place my children will never find me. And honestly, that's exactly how I want it. Because for the first time in my life, the quiet isn't something I'm afraid of anymore. It's something I earned. But before I tell you what I did with the house they were already fighting over, whispering about, hinting at, mentally dividing up like vultures circling roadkill, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest. Backhand index pointing right, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or state in the comments, because I need to know I'm not alone. I need to know there are other women out there who understand what it feels like to give everything you have, your time, your energy, your money, your love, and still get treated like you're disposable once you stop being useful. Because this story, it didn't start with bitterness, it didn't start with anger, it didn't even start with money. It started with love, the kind of love that sacrifices quietly, the kind that never keeps score, the kind that assumes loyalty will be returned simply because it was given. And sometimes that kind of love is the most dangerous of all. 5 years ago, my husband Richard passed away. We were married for 43 years, 43. Not the kind of marriage you see in movies. No dramatic speeches, no grand gestures, just two people choosing each other every single day, even when it wasn't easy. Richard wasn't flashy, he didn't talk much. He wasn't the center of the room, but he was solid, the kind of man who believed love meant responsibility, that you showed it by being dependable, by working hard, by making sure your family never had to wonder if things would be okay. And he did exactly that. When Richard died, the house felt different immediately, not just quieter, emptier. Like the walls themselves noticed he was gone. His coffee mug still sat by the sink for weeks before I could bring myself to move it. His side of the bed stayed untouched. I'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching for him, only to feel cold sheets and realize all over again that he wasn't there. Grief does strange things to you. It fogs your thinking, softens your boundaries, makes you desperate for comfort, any kind. Richard left me comfortable, not rich, not yachts and vacations in Europe, but comfortable enough that I never had to panic about money. A paid-off house worth around $800,000, life insurance, his pension, plus my own social security. I had enough to live quietly, safely, and with dignity for the rest of my life, or so I thought. We have 3 children. Daniel, my oldest, 45, Jennifer, 42, Michael, my baby, 39, 7 grandchildren between them. For most of my life, I truly believed I had done motherhood right. Richard and I paid for college when we could, helped with down payments, showed up to every graduation, recital, emergency, and late-night phone call. We didn't just raise kids, we built adults, or at least that's what I believed. After Richard died, things started to shift. Not all at once, not obviously. It was subtle, almost polite, the kind of change that sneaks in quietly and rearranges your life before you realize what's happening. Daniel started suggesting I downsize. "Mom, that house is too much for you alone," he said casually. "You don't need all that space anymore." Jennifer offered to help manage my finances. "You shouldn't stress your pretty little head with numbers," she joked. "Let me handle it for you." Michael moved his family closer. "I just want to keep an eye on you, Mom," he said. "Make sure you're okay. And listen, I was grieving. Lonely, vulnerable, tired of sleeping alone, tired of making decisions without my partner. So I believed them. I remember thinking, wow, I raised caring kids. I didn't hear the warning bells. I didn't see the trap tightening. Not yet. What I saw was concern. What I felt was relief. Someone needed me again, but this time they also claimed to need to protect me. I didn't notice how quickly conversations shifted from "How are you doing, Mom?" to "What are you planning to do with the house?" I didn't question why my finances suddenly became a family discussion. I didn't stop to ask why my independence was being treated like a problem that needed solving. Because grief makes you trust people you shouldn't, and love makes you excuse things you never would otherwise. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. Richard wasn't even cold in the ground before my role in the family changed. I stopped being a wife who had lost her partner. I started becoming a resource, an asset, a future inheritance everyone was quietly calculating. But at the time, all I knew was that everything felt different. And once things change like that, they never go back. It always starts small. Always. No one ever walks up and says, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to drain your savings and leave you scared about your future." No, that would be too honest. Too obvious. Instead, it begins with reasonable requests, temporary problems, emergencies that feel justified. Daniel's business hit a rough patch. "Just for a few months, Mom," he said. "Once things turn around, I'll pay you back." Jennifer's daughter needed braces. "With 3 kids, money's tight right now," she explained. "It's just this once." Michael's car broke down. "I just need something reliable for work," he said. "I can't risk losing my job." And every time I said yes, because what kind of mother says no to her children? I told myself Richard would have helped them. I told myself this was what parents do, that this was temporary, that family takes care of family, so I wrote the checks, paid the bills, smiled through the discomfort. At first, it didn't feel dangerous, it felt loving. But the emergencies never stopped, and the paybacks, they never came. Months passed, then years, and slowly, so slowly I didn't even notice it happening, my role changed. I stopped being their mother. I became the backup plan, the safety net. The emergency fund that never ran dry. I became a walking, talking ATM with a pulse. The tone of the conversations shifted. Requests turned into assumptions. Jennifer would call and casually mention she'd already enrolled the kids in summer camp, then follow it with, "I'll need $4,500 by Friday. Not can you help?" Not "is that okay, just a deadline." Daniel stopped asking altogether. He'd text me his mortgage amount like I was late on rent, followed by a reminder emoji as if we were joking. Michael didn't even pretend it was a loan anymore. He'd say, "You've got it right," and if I hesitated, he'd sigh like I was being difficult. That's when something inside me started to crack. One night, wide awake at 2 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my bank statements spread out in front of me. The house was dark, quiet. My reflection stared back at me from the window, older than I remembered, more tired than I wanted to admit. I did the math. Over 4 years, almost $300,000. $300,000, that money was supposed to be my future, my safety, my security, my dignity. And suddenly it was gone. That's when the fear finally hit. Because I wasn't living off interest anymore. I was bleeding the principal. Every check I wrote was cutting into the foundation of my life. And if I didn't stop, I wouldn't just be broke, I'd be old and broke. So I made an appointment with my financial advisor. I remember sitting across from him, trying to sound calm while my hands trembled. He tapped numbers into his calculator, nodded slowly, then looked up at me with a seriousness I'd never seen before. "Barbara," he said gently, "at this rate you'll be out of money in about 6 years." 6 years, I did the math in my head. 74 years old, no safety net, no cushion, no backup plan. And suddenly something became painfully clear. Not one of my children had ever asked how long my money needed to last. No one asked about my future. No one asked what would happen to me if things went wrong. They weren't worried about my retirement. They weren't worried about my health. They weren't worried about my survival. They were spending it, spending my future like it was already theirs. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, I finally understood something that changed everything. Love without boundaries isn't generosity, it's self-destruction. People love to say, "just say no," like it's simple, like it doesn't cost you anything, like it doesn't feel like ripping your own heart out with your bare hands. Saying no to strangers, easy. Saying no to coworkers, manageable. But saying no to your own children, that's a whole different kind of pain. After my financial advisor, Thomas, showed me the projections, I didn't go straight home. I sat in my car in the driveway for almost an hour, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel like it might suddenly start giving advice. I just stared because here was the truth nobody ever prepares you for. You can love your children with everything in you and still be scared of them. I was scared of what would happen if I stopped the money, scared of the anger, scared of the guilt, scared of the accusations, but more than anything, I was scared of losing them. Still, there was another fear growing quietly underneath all of that, heavier, darker, and harder to ignore. I was terrified of being 74 years old, broke, and completely alone, so I didn't act right away. I spent 3 months working up the courage, 3 months of sleepless nights staring at the ceiling replaying imaginary arguments, 3 months of anxiety sitting heavy in my chest like a stone, 3 months of practicing conversations in the mirror like a teenager rehearsing a breakup speech. I even wrote notes on little index cards, actual notes. I tucked them into the pocket of my cardigan so I wouldn't forget what I needed to say if my courage failed me. That's how nervous I was. Every time the phone rang, my stomach tightened. Every request for money felt heavier than the last, knowing I was running out of time, not just financially, but emotionally. Eventually, I realized there would never be a perfect moment, so I created one. I called a family meeting. I cooked dinner, real dinner, not something thrown together. I set the table carefully, used the good dishes, the ones I usually saved for holidays and special occasions. I wanted it to feel calm, respectful, loving. I wanted them to remember that I was still their mother. Daniel arrived on time. Jennifer was 40 minutes late, breezing in like nothing in the world revolved around anyone else. Michael, he didn't even bother showing up. He texted instead, "Can't make it. Whatever you need to say, just tell me on the phone." That message sat on my screen longer than it should have. Something in my chest tightened. That should have been my first warning. Because if you can't be bothered to show up when your mother asks you to sit at her table, you're already halfway gone. I remember smoothing the tablecloth with my hands, taking a slow breath and thinking, this is the moment everything changes. I just didn't know yet who it would change into. I had a whole speech planned, pages of it, really, numbers, charts, calm explanations. I was going to walk them through the finances like a presentation at work. I wanted to show them that this wasn't emotional, it was math, reality, survival, but when I finally opened my mouth, none of that came out. What came out was simple, small, honest. I can't keep giving you money. That was it. No accusations, no yelling, no guilt trips, just the truth. And the silence that followed felt physical, like pressure pressing inward on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Daniel slowly set his fork down, the clink against the plate louder than it should have been. Jennifer's face went completely blank, not shocked, not sad, cold. On the speakerphone, I heard Michael inhale sharply, like I'd just pulled the ground out from under him. "What do you mean you can't?" Jennifer asked. Her tone wasn't confused, it was irritated. "I mean exactly that," I said, my voice trembling despite how hard I tried to steady it. "If I keep going like this, I won't have anything left for myself." Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, shaking his head like I'd told a bad joke. "Mom, you're being dramatic," he said. "You're sitting on a house worth almost $1 million." That's when I reached for the papers Thomas had given me. "These are the projections," I said, sliding them across the table. "Over 4 years, I've given you almost $300,000. This isn't sustainable." Jennifer snatched the papers, skimmed them for barely a second, then tossed them back onto the table like they were trash. "These numbers are wrong," she snapped. "That advisor is manipulating you." And that's when something inside me finally broke. "You manage my finances, so you know exactly how much I have left to take," I said quietly. The room froze. Jennifer's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like she hadn't expected resistance. On the phone, Michael's voice crackled through the speaker. "So what, Mom?" he said. "You're just cutting us off after everything we do for you." That stopped me cold. "Everything you do for me," I repeated. "Like what exactly?" There was a beat. Then Jennifer fired back instantly. "I manage your finances. I make sure you're not getting scammed." "No," I said softly. "You check my bank account." Daniel pushed his chair back and stood up, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "This is unbelievable," he said. "Family helps family." That's what Dad would have wanted. Something hardened in my spine, something I didn't even know I still had. "Don't you dare tell me what your father would have wanted," I said, my voice steady now. "He worked himself into the ground to make sure we would be secure, not so you could drain me dry." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Jennifer grabbed her purse. "I think we should go," she said sharply. Clearly, Mom has decided to be selfish. Selfish. That word landed harder than any slap ever could. After decades of sacrifice, after years of saying yes, after emptying my future to cushion theirs, selfish. Daniel didn't look at me as he followed her to the door. Michael disconnected the call without saying goodbye. And just like that, I stopped being their mother. I became the villain in a story where I finally chose myself. They left without saying goodbye. No hugs, no "we'll talk later." No hesitation at the door. Michael hung up the phone just like that. 1 second he was there, the next, silence. I sat alone at that table staring at food no one ate, plates no one touched. The candles burned low, wax pooling around the base like time itself was melting away. Everything I had prepared with care suddenly felt foolish. And then I cried, not delicate tears, not quiet sniffles. I cried until my chest hurt, until my head throbbed, until my body physically couldn't do it anymore. That night cracked something open in me, something I didn't know could break. That was 11 months ago. At first, I told myself they just needed time. They were emotional, defensive, hurt. People say things in anger. Family doesn't disappear over money, right, wrong. The calls stopped. Jennifer, who used to call 3 times a week, sometimes just to complain about her day, went silent. Daniel, who used to stop by every Sunday without fail, vanished. Michael blocked me on social media like I was a stranger, not the woman who carried him for 9 months and held his hand when he was afraid of the dark. When I tried calling them, conversations were clipped and cold. Busy mom, can't talk, kids have stuff going on. Always something, always an excuse. Then came the moment that broke me in a way I didn't know was still possible. Daniel didn't invite me to his son's birthday party. Little Tommy, my first grandchild, I waited for the invitation, checked my phone, checked my mail, told myself maybe it was coming late. It never came. I sent a gift anyway, wrapped it carefully. Included a card with a handwritten note telling him how proud I was, how much I loved him. There was no thank you, no call, no acknowledgement, nothing. Thanksgiving came next. I waited again. Days passed. No one mentioned plans. No one asked what I was doing. No one asked if I'd like to come. When I finally worked up the courage to call Jennifer, she sounded distracted, like I was interrupting something more important. "Oh," she said casually, "we're doing it at Daniel's." There was a pause. "Am I invited?" I asked, a long one. "Mom," she said carefully, "I don't think that's a good idea. Things are tense, tense." That was the word she used, not hurt. Not sad, not broken, tense. I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in my life. A turkey sandwich, old movies playing softly in the background, silence so thick it felt familiar. Christmas was worse. I sent gifts to all 7 grandchildren. Thoughtful ones, the kind you buy when you still believe love will reach them even if words won't. I sent checks to my children too, smaller than before but still generous. A peace offering. A bridge, the checks were cashed, the silence stayed. That's when the truth finally settled in, heavy and undeniable. They didn't miss me, they missed what I gave them. They didn't miss my voice, my presence, my love, or my place at the table. They missed my money, and in that quiet realization, something painful but powerful happened. I stopped waiting. I stopped hoping they'd come back to who they used to be. Because when people show you exactly who they are, especially when you stop being useful, believing them is the first step towards saving yourself. I spent months in a fog after that, not the loud kind of grief, not the kind with wailing or dramatic breakdowns. This was the quiet kind, the kind that dulls everything. Where life keeps moving, but you feel like you're watching it from behind thick glass. I still woke up every morning, still made coffee, still folded laundry, but none of it felt real. This wasn't like losing Richard. When my husband died, people showed up. Neighbors brought casseroles. Friends sat with me on the couch just so I wouldn't be alone. People checked in, called, hugged me, reminded me that I mattered. This felt like being erased. Like I was still breathing, but no longer counted. I stopped going to my book club because people would ask innocent questions. How are the grandkids? Did you see the kids this weekend? And I never knew how to answer. Because saying I haven't seen them in almost a year felt humiliating. Saying they don't talk to me anymore felt like admitting failure. So I smiled, changed the subject, and eventually stopped going altogether. I couldn't risk crying in public over a life that used to be mine. My doctor noticed the change before I admitted it to myself. He asked how I was sleeping. I lied. He asked about my appetite. I lied again. Eventually, he looked at me over his glasses and said gently, "Barbara, I think you're depressed." The word sat heavy in the room. He prescribed antidepressants, low dose, just to help take the edge off, he said. I took them. I lost weight without trying. I slept but never felt rested. Some nights I lay awake listening to the house creak, wondering how a place so full of life could feel so hollow. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a museum. Every room was a display of a life that no longer existed. Photos on the walls of smiling children who wouldn't return my calls. Toys tucked away for grandchildren who no longer visited. Holiday decorations boxed up like artifacts from another era. I'd walk from room to room touching things, the banister Richard built himself, the kitchen counter where I taught my kids to bake cookies, the hallway where they once measured their height on the wall. All of it still there, none of it alive. Then one ordinary afternoon in March, something happened that changed everything. I was at the grocery store, nothing dramatic, no special reason, just milk, bread, eggs. The kind of errand you do on autopilot. I was standing in the soup aisle when I saw her, Patricia, Daniel's wife, my daughter-in-law. My first instinct was to call out to her. I hadn't seen anyone connected to my family in months. I was starving for normal, for connection, for anything that reminded me I hadn't imagined the last 40 years of my life, but something made me pause. She was a few feet away, phone pressed to her ear, and her voice carried. "I know, right?" Patricia laughed. She actually thought we'd keep coming around after she cut us off. I froze, not figuratively, not emotionally, physically. My feet stopped moving. My hand tightened around the grocery basket until my fingers ached. Every sound in the store faded into a dull hum, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. She really doesn't get it, Patricia continued, her voice light, almost amused. Daniel says we should just wait her out. She's old. Eventually she'll die and we'll get the house anyway. Then she laughed again, a real laugh, easy. Casual, comfortable, the kind of laugh you use when you're talking about the weather, or a sale at Target, or something that doesn't matter. Why waste time pretending to care, she said. It's not like she can take it with her. I stood there between shelves of canned soup, frozen in place, listening to my daughter-in-law casually joke about my death, not because she'd miss me, not because it was sad, but because it was convenient, because my house, my home, was more valuable to her than my life. My chest didn't tighten, my throat didn't close, I didn't feel the sharp sting of tears the way I expected to. Instead, something inside me split cleanly down the middle. On one side, there was the woman I had been for decades, the mother who apologized too quickly, the grandmother who gave too much, the wife who always smoothed things over. On the other side, clarity, cold, sharp, unforgiving. They weren't angry at me, they weren't hurt, they weren't mourning the loss of our relationship. They were waiting for me to die. Waiting for time to do the work they didn't want to do themselves. Waiting to inherit what they assumed was already theirs. In that moment, something fundamental changed. I didn't confront her. I didn't call out her name. I didn't demand an explanation or create a scene. Because suddenly I understood something very important. There was nothing left to discuss. I quietly placed the basket down on the floor, milk, bread, eggs. I left it all right there in the aisle. I walked out of the store without looking back. The automatic doors slid open. The sunlight hit my face. I got into my car and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, heart beating steadily, not racing, not braking. And for the first time in months, I didn't cry, not a single tear. Instead, I reached for my phone. I called Thomas. "My financial advisor," I said when he answered. My voice was calm, steadier than it had been in a long time. "I need to sell my house." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Barbara," he said carefully, "that's a big decision." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. "And I don't want my children to know until it's done." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Okay," he said, "but what are you planning to do?" I stared straight ahead through my windshield, watching people push carts toward their cars, completely unaware that my entire life had just shifted. "I'm planning to disappear," I said, and for the first time since all of this began, that word didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. Thomas and I met the very next day. I arrived early, a folder tucked under my arm so thick it barely closed. Every document I owned was inside it: bank statements, insurance policies, deeds, account summaries. 43 years of adult life reduced to paper and ink. Thomas didn't rush me. He never did. He spread everything out across his desk carefully, methodically, like a doctor reviewing scans before delivering a diagnosis. The room was quiet except for the soft tap of his calculator and the occasional scratch of his pen. After a long moment, he looked up. "The market is strong," he said. "If we list now, we could start around 850,000, possibly more depending on interest." I nodded slowly, absorbing the number. "And after fees, taxes, closing costs?" I asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. "You'd walk away with around 700,000, $700,000. I let the number settle. Combined with what I still had left in savings and investments, just under $1 million, enough to start over. Enough to live without fear, enough to never have to beg for love disguised as obligation again. "How long to sell?" I asked. 30 to 60 days, he replied. "The house is desirable." "It may go faster, do it." There was no hesitation in my voice, no wavering, no second guessing. 2 weeks later, we listed the house quietly. No announcements, no family discussions, no warnings. Professional photos captured sunlight spilling through windows, polished floors, carefully staged rooms that hid the cracks in my heart. The house looked beautiful, warm, welcoming, alive. Within 3 days, multiple offers. I accepted one for $910,000. A young couple, married, expecting their first child. When I read their letter, my hands shook. They talked about raising a family there, about holidays, about laughter filling the rooms. The irony was almost unbearable. I was selling the house where I raised my children to people just beginning theirs. Closing was set for 45 days, and during those 45 days, I planned my exit like a woman escaping a burning building. I researched cities where no one knew my name, places with a slower pace, lower cost of living, quiet mornings. That's when I remembered Asheville, North Carolina. Richard and I had visited once decades ago, just a weekend trip, mountains wrapped in fog, art studios tucked into corners, coffee shops where no one rushed you out the door. It had stayed with me. I found a condo overlooking the mountains for $320,000. Cash, no mortgage, no debt, no explanation owed to anyone. I put in an offer, it was accepted, then I started packing, slowly, deliberately. Sorting through 43 years of marriage, motherhood, and memory is not a small thing. every drawer held ghosts. Every box carried a version of myself I no longer recognized. The hardest part was the photos. Albums stacked in closets, boxes tucked under beds, smiling faces frozen in time, birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduations, children who once loved me without conditions. I sat on the floor for hours flipping through them. And then I made a decision. I packed one album, just one, the rest I left behind. Let the house keep its memories. Let strangers wonder who we were. I was done carrying the past like a punishment. 3 weeks before closing, my phone rang. Jennifer's name lit up the screen, the first call in 9 months. I stared at it, my heart steady, not racing, not hopeful. And in that moment, I knew they'd found out. And whatever came next, I was finally ready for it. When Jennifer's name popped up on my phone, my heart did something stupid. It jumped. 9 months of silence, no calls, no texts, no holidays, no birthdays, and suddenly she wanted to talk. For just half a second, I let myself hope. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she finally realized how wrong everything had gone. Maybe this nightmare was finally ending. I hate admitting that part. Hope is embarrassing when it turns out to be misplaced. Mom, she said brightly, her voice coated in sugar. I was just thinking about you. How are you doing? The cheerfulness hit my ears wrong, too polished, too smooth. Like someone slipping into a role they hadn't rehearsed in a while. That tone alone told me everything. This wasn't love, this was strategy. I'm fine, I said carefully, choosing each word like it mattered. How are the kids? Oh, they're great. Busy, you know how it is, she replied quickly. And then, without missing a beat, she slid right into it. Listen, I wanted to apologize. I think we all overreacted about the money thing. Family matters more than money, right? I almost laughed out loud. Family matters more than money, said the woman who disappeared the exact moment the money stopped. The hypocrisy sat heavy between us. That's very mature of you, I said calmly, even though my stomach tightened. So I was thinking, she continued, her voice warming as if we were old friends again, why don't you come over for dinner on Sunday? The whole family will be there, it's been too long. The whole family, that phrase echoed in my head. After 9 months of silence, after missed holidays, after being quietly erased, suddenly there was a seat at the table again. And that's when it clicked. Someone had seen the for sale sign, or a neighbor had talked, or the closing timeline had leaked. They didn't miss me. They missed the house. They missed the equity, the inheritance. The thing they thought time would eventually hand them for free. That sounds lovely, I said, and hated myself a little for how easily the lie came out. Sunday works. She sounded relieved, too relieved. Oh, good. I'm so glad, she said. And Mom, we really have missed you. No, you missed what you thought was coming to you. I hung up the phone and sat there in the quiet, my heart surprisingly steady. There was no confusion anymore. No wondering if I'd misunderstood things, no questioning my own memory. That call wasn't reconciliation, it was reconnaissance, and instead of hurting me, it confirmed everything I already knew. Sunday came. The day arrived quietly, without ceremony, like it didn't know what it represented. No anxiety clawed at my chest, no dread curled in my stomach. I woke up calm, calmer than I had been in months. At 4:45 p.m., exactly 15 minutes before dinner, I sent one text. Sorry, not feeling well, have to cancel. Hope you all have a nice evening. That was it. No explanations, no apologies, no rescheduling. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't hover over it. I didn't check to see if they responded. I didn't brace myself for the fallout. I simply set it face down on the table and walked away. I pictured them sitting at the dining table, plates warming, glasses filled. I imagined Jennifer glancing at the clock, tapping her phone impatiently. Daniel asking where I was. Michael calling once, then twice. I imagined the confusion. Then the irritation, then slowly the panic, because suddenly they weren't in control anymore. And you know what I felt? Nothing, no guilt, no sadness, no twisted sense of satisfaction, just peace. A quiet, unfamiliar peace that settled into my bones and stayed. The closing happened on a Tuesday morning in mid-May. The sky was clear. The air felt lighter than usual, like the world knew something was ending and something else was beginning. I sat at the long conference table signing document after document, my hands steady. No shaking, no hesitation. Each signature felt like cutting another thread tying me to a life that no longer served me. When it was done, the realtor slid the check across the table. $862,000. The number stared back at me. That amount wasn't just money, it was freedom. The buyers were glowing, young, hopeful, expecting their first child. They talked about the backyard like it was a dream come true, about family dinners, about holidays. I wished them well, and I meant it. They deserved the house more than ghosts did. That afternoon, I arrived at my new condo in Asheville. My things were already there, not much, a bed, my favorite chair, books, clothes, one photo album. That was all I brought with me, no clutter. No emotional debt, no reminders of who I used to be. I stepped out onto the balcony and watched the sun sink behind the mountains. Purple, gold, quiet, the air smelled clean. The world felt wide open. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. Before I left them something. Not furniture, not keepsakes, not explanations wrapped in softness. A note. I taped it to the kitchen counter, right where I knew they'd see it the moment they walked in. The same counter where homework used to be spread out, where lunches were packed, where birthday cakes were cut and crumbs swept away with laughter. That felt important. I rewrote the note more times than I care to admit. Too angry felt childish. Too gentle felt dishonest. Too long felt like begging to be understood. In the end, I kept it simple, because the truth doesn't need decoration. I told them the house was sold. I told them I heard the joke, the one about waiting for me to die so they could get the house anyway. I didn't soften that part. I didn't pretend it didn't hurt. I named it exactly for what it was. I told them they didn't treat me like a mother. They treated me like a bank account with a pulse. I told them the money was gone. And so was I. The last line was the hardest to write and the easiest to mean. I hope the $300,000 was worth losing your mother. That was it. No threats, no curses, no dramatic flourish, just consequences. I mailed copies of the note to each of their homes, certified. Time to arrive the day after closing. I wanted the message to land after it was too late to undo anything. That night my phone exploded. Jennifer screaming, not crying, not apologizing, screaming. Daniel furious, shouting about betrayal, about entitlement, about what was supposed to happen. Michael suddenly hurt, suddenly emotional, suddenly confused about why I would do this to them. How could you do this to us? That house was our inheritance. You're going to regret this. I listened to one voicemail. Just one, long enough to recognize the pattern. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them apologized. Not one of them said they missed me. It was all about what they lost. I deleted every message, blocked every number. Changed my email, and then I did something radical. I went to bed not shaking, not crying, not replaying the past. I slept deeply, peacefully. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't bracing for the next demand, the next disappointment, the next emotional withdrawal. The silence didn't scream anymore. It rested. And in that quiet, I finally understood something that took me nearly 70 years to learn. You can love your children fiercely and still walk away when they try to destroy you. Choosing yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you free. About 3 months after I moved to Asheville, I received a certified letter. Certified, the kind of envelope that immediately makes your stomach tighten. The kind that feels official, serious, and slightly threatening, like you've done something wrong. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. An attorney, representing all three of my children. I sat down at my kitchen table, the small, clean one I actually liked, not the massive family table I used to have. Not a table meant for holidays and crowds, just a simple, quiet space that finally felt like mine. I opened the envelope slowly, carefully, as if the words inside might jump out and bite me. They were contesting the sale of the house, claiming I was mentally incompetent, claiming I'd been manipulated, claiming that as my children they were entitled to inherit the family home. I read the letter once, then again, line by line. Legal language dressed up to sound reasonable, but underneath it all was the same message they'd been sending for years. You don't get to decide what happens to your own life. I leaned back in my chair, and then I laughed, not a sharp laugh. Not a bitter one, a real laugh. Because if they had put even half this effort into loving me, into calling me, visiting me, caring whether I was alive or lonely, we wouldn't be here. They hadn't worried about my mental competence when I was writing checks. They hadn't worried about manipulation when they were draining my accounts. But the moment the money was gone, suddenly I was fragile, confused, unfit to make decisions. It was almost impressive. I poured myself a cup of coffee and let it cool while I stared out the window at the mountains. Quiet, solid, unmoved by drama. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. Her name was Patricia, a sharp woman with a calm voice and zero patience for nonsense. She specialized in elder law, which meant she'd seen this story more times than I could imagine. I emailed her a copy of the letter. She read it. Then she laughed too. Barbara, she said, this is nonsense. That word alone felt like medicine. You own the house outright, she continued. You were medically cleared as fully competent. The sale was legal in every possible way. They have zero legal standing. Zero. For the first time in a long while, my shoulders relaxed. So, what do? I asked. Nothing, she said calmly. I'll shut it down. There was a pause. Then she added almost casually, do you want me to include a cease and desist? Make it very clear they're not to contact you again? I didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Yes, I said. Because boundaries don't work if they're optional, and I was done letting my own children threaten my peace. Patricia's response went out 2 days later. 2 pages, single-spaced, perfectly polite, and absolutely devastating. There was no anger in it, no emotion, no room for interpretation, just facts, the kind that don't bend to guilt, history, or family titles. It stated clearly and without apology, the sale of the home was legal. I was the sole owner. I was medically and legally competent. My children had no claim to the property or its proceeds. Then came the part that made me sit back in my chair and exhale for the first time in weeks. Any further attempts to contact me, directly or indirectly, would be considered harassment and handled accordingly. Just like that, years of emotional leverage vanished in a paragraph. No more late-night voicemails filled with accusation. No more surprise letters meant to intimidate. No more threats disguised as concern. It was over, not because I argued harder, not because I begged, but because I finally put something stronger than love between us. The law, and the law didn't care that they were my children. It didn't care about their hurt feelings, their expectations, their version of the story. It only cared about truth. And the truth was simple: they couldn't bully me anymore. I won't pretend it didn't still hurt. These were my kids, the ones I carried in my body, rocked to sleep, stayed up nights worrying about. Seeing a grandmother holding her grandchild's hand at the park still hit me in the chest like a dull ache. Holidays still arrived quietly, without noise or chaos or anyone asking what time dinner would be. Sometimes the silence crept back in, but then I would remember Patricia's laugh in that grocery store aisle, waiting for me to die, waiting patiently for my life to end so they could profit from it. And whatever guilt tried to crawl back in, it disappeared, replaced by something stronger, something steadier, self-respect. For the first time, I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't defending my choices. I wasn't asking permission to live my own life. I was protected, and more importantly, I was protecting myself. A few weeks after the legal dust settled, I was sitting outside a small cafe with my neighbor, Margaret. She was 72, a retired schoolteacher, sharp as a tack, with kind eyes and a voice that carried experience rather than opinion. We'd fallen into an easy rhythm: morning walks, occasional coffee, conversations that didn't require pretending. That day she stirred her coffee slowly and looked at me over the rim of her mug. "Do you have children?" she asked gently. "I do," I said. "We're not in contact." I braced myself without meaning to. That question usually came with advice or judgment wrapped in concern, but Margaret simply nodded, not surprised, not uncomfortable, like she already understood. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the people who should love us the most hurt us the worst." The truth of it landed softly, not like a wound, but like recognition. She told me about her son, how he'd once been kind, how he'd changed when money entered the picture, how he'd made choices that left her no room but distance. "I spent years asking myself what I did wrong," she said. "Years wondering if loving him harder would fix it." She looked out at the street for a long moment. "It didn't." "Do you regret it?" I asked. She stirred her coffee again, slower this time. "I regret who he chose to become," she said. "But I don't regret protecting myself." Then she said something that settled into me like a truth I'd been circling my entire life. "You can't preserve your dignity and a dead relationship at the same time," she said. "You have to choose." I felt something unclench inside my chest because I had chosen. I chose peace over chaos, silence over manipulation, safety over obligation. I chose myself. That choice didn't erase the sadness. It didn't magically make holidays full again or erase decades of memories, but it gave me something far more valuable: freedom. These days, my life is smaller and richer. I wake up to mountain air. I walk trails where no one knows my history. I drink coffee without bracing for a phone call that might cost me money or dignity. I volunteer at the library. I read, I rest. I am not waiting anymore, not for apologies, not for change, not for permission. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: family isn't defined by blood alone, it's defined by care. And anyone who teaches you that you must suffer to deserve love isn't loving you at all. The first month after I blocked my children felt strange, not sad, not happy, just quiet. I kept waiting for the guilt to show up like an overdue bill, waiting for that heavy, crushing feeling mothers are supposed to feel when they choose themselves. The kind of guilt people warn you about in hushed tones, as if it's inevitable, as if it's punishment. It never came. Instead, something else arrived: peace. Real peace, not the fragile kind that disappears when your phone rings. Not the kind you have to defend or explain, the kind that settles into your bones and stays. I woke up without anxiety for the first time in years. No knot in my stomach, no tightness in my chest. No reflexive reach for my phone, bracing myself for another demand disguised as a crisis. There were no messages waiting, no emergencies, no guilt-laced requests. No one needed anything from me. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt good. At first, I didn't know what to do with all that space. When you spend decades being needed, silence feels unfamiliar, almost suspicious. I'd catch myself thinking, shouldn't I be doing something for someone right now? But slowly, the quiet stopped feeling empty. It started feeling open. I joined a book club at the local library. The kind where people argue about characters like they're real and linger afterward just to talk. No one asked about my family history. No one measured my worth by what I could provide. I started watercolor classes at the community center. Turns out I'm terrible. My trees look like blobs. My skies never quite cooperate, but I laughed more in those classes than I had in years. There was something healing about being bad at something and enjoying it anyway. I also began volunteering twice a week at a women's shelter. Women who had been knocked flat by life, divorce, loss, abuse, addiction. Women rebuilding themselves piece by piece. They didn't know my past. They didn't know about the house, the money, the betrayal. They just knew me, Barbara, the woman who listened without fixing, the woman who showed up when she said she would, the woman who remembered names and made eye contact and meant it. And that meant everything. For so long, my value had been tied to what I gave: money, help, solutions. Here, my value was simply my presence. And slowly, something inside me began to heal. I realized how exhausted I'd been, how much emotional labor I'd carried without ever naming it, how many years I'd spent shrinking myself so others could feel bigger. The peace didn't come with fireworks, it came quietly, in mornings without dread, in afternoons without obligation, in evenings where nothing was required of me except rest. I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was finally returning to myself. 6 months into my new life, I did something I had never done before. I took a trip alone. No coordinating schedules, no covering extra costs, no paying for anyone else's meals, tickets, or emergencies. No guilt trailing behind every decision. Just me. I chose Santa Fe because it felt right. Warm colors, art everywhere, a place that didn't rush you. I booked 2 weeks without asking anyone if it worked for them, and it did. I wandered art galleries without checking the time. I ate incredible food simply because I wanted to. I stayed in a small bed and breakfast that smelled like fresh coffee and sunlight every morning. No one expected anything from me. One afternoon, I walked into a little jewelry shop tucked between two adobe buildings, the kind of place you'd normally pass by unless you were unhurried. That's when I saw it, a turquoise necklace. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't delicate. It felt solid, grounded, like it belonged to a woman who knew herself. It was expensive. The old me immediately whispered that money could help one of the kids. The old me would have felt guilty even touching it. The old me would have put it back and walked away, convincing herself that wanting something was selfish. But the new me didn't argue. The new me simply thought, I like it, so I bought it. No second guessing, no internal justification. No mental math about who might need help later, just joy. Every morning on that trip, I woke up calm. No phone lighting up with demands. No disappointment waiting on the other end of a call. No one telling me I wasn't doing enough. I wore the necklace everywhere, walking through markets, sitting in cafes, watching sunsets. It rested against my chest like a quiet reminder, this life is mine. I realized then how much of my adult life had been spent shrinking my own desires to make room for everyone else's. How often I denied myself simple pleasures because someone else might need something more. But here I was, living the life Richard and I had worked so hard to build, not watching it drain away into other people's entitlement, not apologizing for enjoying it, just living. That trip changed something in me. It taught me that independence isn't loneliness. It's ownership, ownership of time, of money, of choice. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you never want to give it back. I'm 70 now. That number still surprises me when I say it out loud. Not because I feel old, but because for the first time in my life, I feel settled, grounded, fully present in my own skin. My life in Asheville is quiet, not empty, quiet. There's a difference. My mornings begin slowly. I open the curtains and let the mountain light spill in. I drink my coffee without rushing. I read, I walk, I breathe. I have friends who value me not for what I can give them, but for who I am. Friends who listen, friends who laugh easily, friends who don't keep score. I have hobbies that make me feel alive. Paint-stained hands from watercolor class, books stacked by my chair. Volunteer shifts that leave me tired in the best possible way. And I have a home with no ghosts, no echo of old arguments, no furniture heavy with memory, no rooms waiting for people who will never return. Sometimes people ask if I have children. I do, I say. We're not close. That's it. I don't explain. I don't apologize. That story doesn't own me anymore. Of course I miss my grandchildren. That ache doesn't disappear just because you choose yourself. When I see little hands wrapped around a grandmother's fingers at the park, something still tightens in my chest. And yes, I wish my children had chosen differently. I wish they had chosen love over greed, connection over entitlement, respect over control. I wish they had remembered that I was their mother before I was their resource. But here's the truth most people don't want to say out loud. They didn't lose an inheritance. They lost their mother long before I sold that house. They lost me the moment they decided I was worth more dead than alive. The moment they joked about waiting for me to die. The moment they treated my future like a countdown clock. That was the real loss. Selling the house was just paperwork. Walking away was survival. I didn't disappear out of spite. I disappeared because staying would have destroyed me. And I refuse to let my story end that way. Some people think forgiveness means reopening the door. It doesn't. Sometimes forgiveness looks like distance, like boundaries that don't bend, like choosing peace even when it costs you the life you thought you'd have. I don't know how my story will end, but I know how it won't. It won't end with me waiting quietly to die so someone else can profit. It won't end with me shrinking myself to earn scraps of affection. It will end with dignity, with peace, with a woman who finally chose herself not because she stopped loving her children, but because she loved herself enough to live. Here's the lie we don't talk about enough: that being a good parent means sacrificing yourself forever. That if your children are struggling, no matter how old they are, no matter the choices they've made, it's your responsibility to fix it, to fund it, to carry it on your back like it's your debt to pay. I believed that lie for decades. I believed love meant saying yes even when it hurt, even when it scared me, even when it chipped away at my peace, my security, my future. I believed a good mother didn't get tired, didn't say no, didn't ask for anything in return. I thought love was measured by how much you were willing to endure. But here's the truth I learned the hard way: love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. Permission for people to ignore your limits, permission to drain you, permission to treat your life like it matters less than their comfort. And I gave my children that permission, not because they were cruel by nature, not because they were born selfish, but because I never forced them to see me as human. I let myself be useful instead. I taught them that my fear mattered less than their convenience, that my safety was negotiable, that my future could be spent without my consent. When I finally stopped, when I finally said no, they didn't pause to ask if I was okay. They didn't ask if I was scared. They didn't ask if I needed help. They didn't wonder how I would survive without them. They walked away. And as painful as that realization was, it gave me clarity I'd never had before. Because people who love you don't disappear when you stop being useful. They don't punish you for protecting yourself. They don't abandon you when you ask to be treated with basic respect. That moment told me everything I needed to know. It told me that what we had wasn't unconditional love. It was a system, one where I gave and they took, one where my role was to absorb the cost, one where my value was measured in dollars, favors, and silence. And systems like that don't break because someone is mean. They break because someone finally refuses to participate. Walking away from that lie didn't make me a bad mother, it made me an honest one. This part hurts, but it's real. My children benefited from my fear. They benefited from my guilt, the kind that keeps you awake at night wondering if you've done enough. From my loneliness, from my desperation to stay connected at any cost. As long as I was afraid of losing them, they held all the power. They didn't have to threaten me. They didn't have to say it out loud. The fear lived inside me already. Every time I worried that saying no would push them away, they gained leverage. Every time I chose their comfort over my safety, the imbalance grew, and they got used to it, used to my silence, used to my compliance, used to the idea that my needs were optional. The moment I chose myself, they vanished. No conversations, no attempts to understand, no concern for my well-being. That's how I knew the truth. They weren't angry about money. They were angry about losing control. Control disguised as family obligation. Control masked as that's what parents do. Control enforced by guilt instead of force. You can't save people who need you broken to stay comfortable. You can't rescue people who benefit from your exhaustion, because your suffering isn't a side effect to them. It's the system. I used to believe that if I loved harder, gave more, sacrificed deeper, something would eventually shift. That gratitude would appear, that respect would grow. It doesn't work like that. No amount of love fixes entitlement. No amount of patience heals a lack of accountability. And no amount of self-destruction will ever teach someone to value you. Relationships only heal when both sides want wholeness, not when one side needs the other to stay small. When I stepped out of that role, the role of provider, fixer, emotional sponge, the relationship didn't crack. It collapsed because there was nothing underneath it. That wasn't failure, that was proof. Proof that the connection depended on my suffering to survive. And I refused to apologize for refusing to suffer anymore. Choosing myself wasn't abandonment. It was the first honest act I'd made in years. Some people say I ran away. They say I abandoned my family, that I chose money over love, that I took the easy way out. They're wrong. I didn't run away. I walked toward peace. Running is driven by fear. This was driven by clarity. I chose dignity over obligation. Self-respect over guilt. Life over waiting quietly to die for someone else's benefit. For years, I stayed because I was afraid of what leaving would mean, afraid of being judged, afraid of being labeled selfish, afraid of confirming every cruel stereotype about aging women who stop giving. But staying was costing me my health, my safety, my future. Leaving saved my life. Disappearing wasn't weakness, it was survival. It was the moment I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could endure. The moment I stopped mistaking tolerance for love. The moment I understood that peace doesn't come from fixing broken people, it comes from refusing to let them break you. Some doors are meant to close quietly, not slammed, not dramatized, just closed firmly and finally. If you're watching this and feeling guilty for wanting peace, if you feel selfish for setting boundaries, if you're scared that choosing yourself will cost you relationships you can't afford to lose, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. You are allowed to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't bandage you. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to build a life that doesn't hurt. Love should not feel like self-erasure. Family should not feel like a threat. Loyalty should not demand your destruction. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't care, it means you cared enough to survive. And survival, that is not selfish, that is brave. I didn't tell this story to punish my children. That's important to say out loud. I didn't tell it to shame them or expose them or drag their names through the mud. I didn't tell it to make myself look strong, brave, or heroic. And I definitely didn't tell it to play the victim. I told this story for one reason only, because somewhere out there, right now, there's a woman sitting in a quiet house. She's staring at walls that hold decades of memories. She's listening to a silence she doesn't recognize. She's wondering how she gave everything, her time, her love, her body, her money, and still ended up feeling disposable. She's asking herself questions she's too afraid to say out loud. How did this happen? What did I do wrong? Why do I feel so invisible? I want her to know something. She's not crazy. Sometimes love is taken, not returned. Sometimes the people you raise forget who you are once they no longer need you. Sometimes you do everything right and still end up hurt, not because you failed, but because you trusted people who benefited from your silence. We don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about what happens when motherhood becomes expectation instead of connection, when sacrifice turns into entitlement, when love is measured by what you're willing to lose. We tell women to be patient, to be understanding, to keep the peace at all costs, even when the cost is themselves. And when they finally reach a breaking point, we ask them to explain, to justify, to soften their boundaries so no one else feels uncomfortable. I stopped doing that. I stopped explaining myself because I realized something that took me nearly 70 years to understand. I didn't owe my children my future. I had already given them my past. I gave them sleepless nights, school lunches, doctor appointments, college tuition, emergency checks, years of emotional labor no one ever counted. I gave them stability when they needed it most, and that was enough. Choosing to stop didn't erase the love I had for them. It simply meant I stopped sacrificing myself to prove it. This story isn't about cutting people off. It's about waking up. It's about recognizing when love has turned into obligation and choosing to step out of that role before it destroys you. If you see yourself in this story, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not weak for wanting peace. You are not cruel for setting boundaries, and you are not failing because you refuse to disappear quietly. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop explaining yourself to people who never listened in the first place. My children wanted an inheritance. They never said it outright, not in those words, but everything they did pointed to it. The silence, the entitlement, the waiting, the quiet calculations about what would eventually be theirs. What they wanted wasn't connection, it was possession. They assumed time would do the work for them, that patience would pay off. That if they waited long enough, everything I built would simply fall into their hands, no effort required, no accountability demanded. But inheritance doesn't work that way. You don't inherit from someone you've already lost. They lost me long before I sold the house. They lost me the moment they decided my value was tied to what I could give them, the moment my presence mattered less than my bank balance, the moment my future became something they felt entitled to spend. They lost me when silence felt easier than accountability, when not calling was more convenient than apologizing, when avoidance replaced responsibility, when they chose distance instead of repair. They lost me when they joked about my death instead of showing up for my life. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was a choice. Money doesn't change people, it reveals them. It strips away the performance and shows what's underneath: priorities, values, intentions. And what money revealed in my family was painful but undeniable. It revealed who saw me as a person and who saw me as a payout. Boundaries did the same. The moment I set them, the relationship didn't weaken, it disappeared. Because boundaries don't destroy healthy relationships, they expose unhealthy ones. I didn't take anything from my children. I simply stopped giving what they were never meant to own. My life, my security, my future. They didn't lose an inheritance. They lost access. Access to my money, access to my silence. Access to the version of me that existed only to make their lives easier. And that loss wasn't caused by cruelty. It was caused by consequence. You can't inherit love when you refuse to practice it. You can't expect loyalty when you offer none. And you can't wait for someone to die and still call yourself family. That was the lesson, not delivered in anger, but in truth. I didn't disappear because I was weak. I disappeared because I finally understood my worth. There's a difference. Weakness stays where it's being hurt because it's afraid of change. Strength walks away even when it's painful because it knows staying would be worse. My life now is quiet. Not the lonely kind, the healed kind. I wake up without fear sitting in my chest. I don't check my phone with dread anymore. There are no expectations waiting for me, no emotional debts to pay, no invisible scorecard measuring what I owe the world today. My mornings are simple: coffee on the balcony, mountain air, sunlight moving slowly across the floor. My heart no longer feels like it's being drained, no guilt whispering that I should be doing more. No anxiety telling me I'm failing someone, no fear that love will disappear if I stop sacrificing myself. This peace didn't come from revenge, it came from choosing myself. For the first time in my life, I am not surviving for someone else's comfort. I am living. If you're watching this and something inside you feels exposed, if you feel seen in a way that makes your chest tighten, I want you to listen closely. If you've ever been treated like a resource instead of a person, if your value has been measured by what you give, not who you are, if you've been made to feel guilty for wanting rest, safety, or joy, this is your permission. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to choose a life that doesn't hurt. You don't need to prove how much you've suffered to deserve respect. You don't need to keep bleeding to show that you love deeply. And you don't need to explain yourself to people who only listened when they needed something. Love is not supposed to cost you your dignity. Family is not supposed to feel like a threat. And peace is not something you earn by enduring pain long enough. It is something you choose. I am not angry anymore. I am not bitter. I am free. Free from waiting. Free from justifying. Free from shrinking myself to keep others comfortable. I'm Barbara. I disappeared, and I've never been happier. If this story reached you, if it echoed something you've been carrying quietly, then like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story if you're ready, because there are more of us out there than we think. Women choosing peace over pain, truth over silence, life over obligation. This life belongs to nobody but me. And that's the ending I chose.